God. Okay. Okay, yeah. It should be recording. Okay, cool. So I have a few questions here, but of course, if it goes off the rails, it goes off the rails. So don't worry. This is just kind of like an outline. But I realize I have so many things I want to ask you, but I'm sure we will not get through them all. But first, can you talk a little bit about tell me about meta sessions?
Sure. Okay, so Meta Sessions is a coaching and consulting company that I really just wanted to see exist in the world. So when I was younger, I had a good amount of, let's just say, family drama or, a tumultuous situation in my family situation. So I experienced a lot of therapy, which was really lovely and I really enjoyed it. And then at 23, I met a life coach and I'd heard of this industry and I asked if I could do an informative interview with him. And he said yes. And so I asked him like 20 questions and then he gave me a free session. And what I found, and so I was like, ooh, this is exciting. And what I found was it had everything that I loved about therapy, as in it was a safe and secure space to process things, which was great. But I loved how it was more present future oriented and less present past oriented. And so it was more like where are you now and how do you get to where you want to go? And so from then on I was really hooked into coaching. I've had a coach now for like 6 years. Um but one of the things is there's just certain things that I wanted to see in the industry that I just hadn't seen and experienced. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It just for me I hadn't seen it. Some would be like a visual keepsake that at the end of processing everything you have like what did you learn, what are your action items, how are you feeling, what was covered. So there's a visual keepsake that happens in meta session. I also really wanted a non-salesy, non-closey, kind of non-super capitalistic coaching organization. And so I meet my clients where they're at. I don't say that they need it. It's something absolutely like it's a tool. It's a tool that they can use and more like a power tool. Everything that you can experience in a meta session, you could probably experience on your own. It's just you can maybe get there a little bit faster, feel a little bit safer while doing it in a meta session. And then the last thing that I liked is I've had a lot of experience doing consulting. And in consulting, it's more like I take all my experience and my expertise and I really just map out things or I even do the work for my clients. But in this coaching consulting model, I lead with coaching, really helping my clients figure out what's their truth, what do they want, but there's this consulting like lever or hat that I can put on that if they ever do feel stuck, they can say, okay, I'm stuck here. There must be something I don't know. Can you give me a methodology? Can you give me a technique? Can you give me another story, so that I don't feel alone on this one? And that's where I can put on the consultant hat, share everything that I know, provide different methodologies, and then put the coaching hat back on to help them find their truth. And so Meta Sessions is a coaching consulting company that really focuses on meeting clients where they're at, but also, shoot, there was another thing I was going to say, but I forgot. But meeting clients where they're at. Yeah.
Okay. I really like how you have your work in consulting like kind of feeds into your work in coaching because
Yeah.
like I think at first I thought of those as like pretty like separate entities, but I like that you found a way to kind of blend them together.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I would say like maybe like 40% of the sessions that I've done, the client will use the consulting branch at some point. And I think the thing that I really like about it also is that it's very client led. I think I don't want to diss the industry, but I just feel like there is a lot of really salesy, really close, like, and it's very exorbitantly expensive to the point where you get to feed the fed, right? The wealthy can get these incredible supportive resources to help align with themselves. Because I do think that we're right now in an age where you can do anything. I mean, not anything, but a lot. There's so many options. And really, the number one resource we need is just to filter the noise and to like kind of like be with ourselves a bit more and create that own sense of belonging of how do we want to exist in the world. And that's why I'm a lifestyle design coach, which really is everything and nothing. But for me, I've designed a life very much the way that I want it to, so that there's like a very little like apologetic sense of like, oh no, this happened to me. I mean, yes, things are happening to us, but I definitely feel like I've co-created my life with whatever's given with me, and I really want to help enable my clients to feel that empowerment as well.
Can you talk a bit more about this idea of lifestyle design? I know we kind of touched on it last time also when we chatted. But can you talk about like kind of because I think that to I guess design our lives in the way that we want to, a lot of times we have to kind of let go of some of the things that society tells us. We have to let go of some of the systems and we kind of have to let go of a lot of things. And like you said, filter out a lot of the noise.
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess like what are there things that are common that you tell your clients like, oh, this is like a core piece of like being able to design your life?
Yeah. So one thing that's kind of interesting is I actually try not to tell my clients much and just try to help them kind of figure out what their truths are. I will say that there is kind of like a principle that a guiding principle I have, which is to contextualize everything. So, you could say let go, but really a lot of times there are voices that like form our belief systems. And so there could be a question of like, whose voice is this? Is it my voice? Is it my mom's voice? Is it society's voice? And just because it exists in our head doesn't mean that it's important or not important. I think the thing for us is to say how important, right? So let's say something like social status. When you do something, it's okay that social status goes with it, right? But is it the lead driver or is it just like, a side factor? And so it's almost like in our sessions, a client will share everything that's coming up for them, and what we're doing is just like every bear has its cave. We're just taking and contextualizing it and even saying, okay, here's a space for the unknown. Now, how do we want to navigate? And it's kind of like, um, I'm going to quote Jim Quick on this about being the thermostat and not the thermometer. So, yes, you can read the room, you can read the temperature, but it's like, how do we calibrate ourselves so that we find the temperature that we want to be? Or like, go in the general direction where we want to go.
Okay. That's helpful.
Did
It's
did I
actually
answer that? Did I answer your question
you
correctly?
did. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you did.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting that you mentioned Jim Quick actually, because I actually met him once a couple of years ago. So
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, I was going to say something and okay, I remember. So when you're doing life design, when it comes to your own life design, do you have you heard of the dimensions of wellness?
No, I have not, which is maybe I should have learned about the dimensions of wellness. Tell me about the dimensions of wellness.
Okay, no worries. I mean, the reason I mentioned it was that I felt like it was kind of it like whenever I talk to you, it always reminds me of it. So basically it like has these 8 dimensions that kind of feed into your whole like holistic sense of wellness. And those 8 dimensions are, I have it pulled up here.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, environmental, financial, occupational, and social.
Okay.
Yeah, so like these different facets that feed into your general wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I brought it up was that I feel like whenever I talk to you, you kind of talk about like your updates are given kind of in a holistic sense of who
Mm-hmm.
you are. And so it kind of always reminds me of like these 8 dimensions of wellness.
Nice.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about crafting the interview, I really struggled with like, I'm like, how do I want to like capture you without
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like holding you into like this one thing that you do. And so I feel like, I don't know, my thought was like to kind of go through like these dimensions and like talk about
Sure.
the different things that kind of feed into your whole like being.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Uh, so for meta sessions, at first I thought of it as like maybe that's like your occupational, like where do you think that fits? Where do you personally think it fits?
Yeah. So meta sessions, I think it's fair to put that in occupational. I
Okay.
think one thing that is interesting from it is unlike other jobs where you can kind of enter and leave, and that's kind of a general thing, because it's my own organization, my plan is to do it until I die or
Yeah.
until I'm tired, so like it's like one of those things where like it does generate revenue. It doesn't generate insane amounts of revenue, but that's also because I made the hardline decision where that wasn't the purpose. The
Yeah.
purpose was to like create something that I felt like needed to be created. And it's great that there's revenue associated with it. But for my savings goals, there's other areas in which I can kind of obtain it. Um, and so I guess, yeah, we could say that's occupational because I will always be making space for it. And it is something that ideally I'll scale out and have other coaches and like even evergreen courses associated with it. But for now, it's just something I really enjoy and that's organically growing.
Yeah. And it's beautiful also that it's something that you love and connect with. So I got to watch your YouTube videos.
You know, they take like half an hour of my time. It's great. I put
They're
so much
so
effort into
good.
it.
No, I love them. And I love that, like, so I actually, some of the things you mentioned, I was like, oh, you talked about that. So like one of the things you mentioned was your financial structure when it comes to meta sessions and how you've decided intentionally that you want your finances to come in from somewhere else.
Yes.
And so I think that in the video you talked about how consulting is kind of your channel for that. Um,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So actually, well, now, so historically, I've just done business development for different companies. My most recent one prior to my current offering, so I guess we can get into the new update, is I was director of business development for a small startup. And anyone who's grown a small startup from like the founding five plus will tell you that you actually wear tons of hats. And what your job is to basically build a job, develop a job, and then give that job away to someone else to run with. I'm happy to say that since last I've talked to you, I've gone from consulting to now being onboarded as the vice president of business development for a tech company called Cloudify. And it's an international company that has a really, really wonderful team. And it simply put does Wi-Fi security. So, yeah.
Okay. Is that pretty different from anything else that you've done before? Or would you say that the nature of the work is still like relatively the same?
I would say it's kind of like the leveling up of everything that well, not everything, but of a lot of things that I've done before. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, very cool. Okay. Well, speaking of your YouTube channel, um, where would you say that YouTube kind of like if you were to put it into a category, where do you think that YouTube would fit into that?
Into like my life of the 8 dimensions. I feel like I should pull up the 8 dimensions so that I can have them visually
Actually,
reference.
I will share screen with you so that you can see them.
Okay.
Okay.
Amazing. Yeah. So it's funny because I have seen this and it's so funny because there's so many that some of them are 3, some of them are 5, some of them are 7, some of them are 12.
I've seen like
So,
9, yeah.
so we're 9. I was just like, oh. So okay, so where would I put YouTube?
Yeah.
Oh man, I put kind of YouTube in all of it, to be honest. I put
Okay.
YouTube in the center, but that is like the actual organization of like what is YouTube, not necessarily my channel. I would say out of like all the technological pieces ever, YouTube is the one that I just like adore because it helps me out of my emotional funks. It educates me in so many ways. Even when I learn, different physical things, when, it just in every way. It's kind of like when you go to the internet, you're like peering into like this like godlike consciousness of the world, right? And I just love YouTube because you can just the parameters are amazing, just different amounts of time, and you're like, oh well, I want to learn more about getting fit, and then you can just go into the big orb of what it is, and you can get 5 different perspectives, and then kind of like formulate kind of a more objective opinion from it. So, yeah.
I love your YouTube videos. I love like the bite size like information. And I like that. Can you talk about your decision to do it like in the outdoors? Because like the style of it is just like in these different places in the great outdoors.
Yeah, I think it's so funny because honestly, I would not like, I mean, there's like 4 videos. I'm just doing one video a week for a whole year. And the sole purpose is to just be open, curious, and diligent about it. And the reason why I'm doing it is, well, because actually, or what started it was a friend just telling me that I had to. So, it's a very much activity based goal. Like there's no like I must monetize this or I must get this many likes or subscribers. It's really just the act of doing it. But the decision that I made it's almost like little mini, like the concept of like meta sessions or like my purpose is really there's so many ways that we can live. And so I decided to do it outdoors because I love being outside. I think it's beautiful. And I do think in YouTube, when I see a lot of these like videos, they're not outside enough. Or, they're normally like someone in their room and like this kind of background. And that's great. But I just feel like we're happier when we're outside. So if I'm filming it outside, I'm going to be a little bit happier and more grounded. And anyone watching it, whatever content they're going to be a little bit more happier and more grounded. So that's kind of like, and right now I have the privilege of being out in Maui. So it's a beautiful place. There's a lot of great outdoors. And one of the biggest appeals of why I live here right now. And then the format of it is just I ask a question and then, or two, and then I answer it. And then I turn it back to the viewer for them to sit with of how they want to interpret their answer to that question. And that's it. It's very, very simple. Like no makeup. Maybe that'll change. No devices other than my phone in my hand. And normally under 10 minutes. So yeah.
It's so organic and just like there's like no fluff at all. It's just like you're sitting outside and just talking to the camera. I love it. And it's so vulnerable also. And I thought, okay, so one of your videos, I think it was the last one, where you're talking about contextualization and having a sense of humor as you go about life. And then
Yes.
you're talking about having a companion. And there was this duck in the background. And I thought it was so funny. I laughed out loud. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That was so good.
Yeah. It's my roommate's duck. His name is Cucumber. And it was great because I was actually in another background. I was like, and you need to have a sense of humor. And then it's as I was seeing it, I looked past the phone and I see the duck and I was like, speaking of which, me and my companion, so yeah.
It was so funny. So I know that you also talked about starting a podcast this morning.
Yes.
So can you talk about that and how maybe how that outlet is a little bit different or similar to YouTube for you?
Yeah, sure. I see podcasts to be more time committal. So like, there's so many ways to absorb content. And the thing that I love YouTube is every once in a while I'll watch something that's more than 20 minutes, but I normally use YouTube as kind of like this big mega database. And so I'll normally watch 3 videos that are under 20 minutes. And sometimes I'll do like a deep dive, like I'll just learn about different types of dance. And I just go woo, and I'll spend a few hours. But in those few hours, I'll normally watch like 5 to 10 videos, and then walk away being like, whoa, my perception of the world is different. Podcasts, I feel like they allow you to go deeper. So I kind of see like a lot of YouTube as breadth. And of course, there's hour-long videos, and sometimes that is, but that's not the majority of my YouTube usage. And podcasts are a little bit deeper. So you get like 20 minutes to 15 20 minutes all the way to an hour, so kind of my max for YouTube becomes my minimum for podcasts. And this one, it was just great. It was just a friend saying that he always wanted to do a podcast, and then he just looks at me, he's like, I can't believe I've never thought of this, you should be my co-host. And I'm like, sure, okay, let's do it. And he's like, we have these kind of conversations anyways. And I'm like, great. So we just showed up, and he's like, I want our first episode to be about life purpose, and I want our second one to be about the philosophy of finance or the philosophy of money. And I'm like, let's do this. So we just hit the record button, just on a Google Meet, and we'll post one on the 7th February, and then the second one we're going to post later on, like on the 21st. And so just once a month, we're going to meet up, give ourselves like, 20 minutes to an hour on each topic, and then have 2 posts later on that month. And yet again, it's the same thing. It's just that open, diligent kind of, sharing. And, I absorb so much content that it is kind of nice to feel like I'm in a more of a closed loop system. Like I am contributing to the greater consciousness of the orb of what is the internet and YouTube, while also like downloading and, receiving. I actually consume much more than I produce, but I think actually that's the way it should be, right? So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you feel like do you get like nervous when you're producing? Because I feel like a lot of times I can't help but feel a little bit like nervous or stressed out when I'm putting myself out there into the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I felt that a lot more when I was younger. Um, and I don't as much now. And anyone who looks at my YouTube, you can see my pores. Like it's so intimate, you the bags under my eyes. There's like it's really like it really looks not like a YouTuber in the fact that it's so far from polished. It's very up close and personal. And I think for me, I like it philosophically. I like um I like being like kind of unabashedly flawed and human. And so like there's so many things in the world that is polished and I almost like want that to be there. And so it's almost like I want to hit that niche of like what I consider to be candid lo-fi existence, I just found out recently that there's like this application called like real time or what it's really like, and it's like the opposite of social media, and you have this like little group of like your actual intimate friends and you actually take photos of yourself and whatever you're doing in the mundane.
Be real.
Be real, there we go. Exactly. So like I just kind of feel like if there was something that I was going to like be more aligned with, I think the be real makes more sense for me. One, it takes less effort, you know like if it was really easy for me to look like some gorgeous superstar, would I do it? Absolutely, why not? Or I mean, or maybe, but it just yet again, everything that we do comes with it contextualizes into other things. And so if I wanted to make more polished videos, it would require more time. And so there's so many things that I really value, and understanding that there are so many waking hours in a day. It's more important to me to live with the value of being honest and candid and having it take low energy from me than it is for me to have something that's like pretty and very nice, and that would almost like it would inhibit my ability to actually do something sometimes. So I do feel like the opposite of a perfectionist, like someone who's like, let's try it, let's see how I feel about doing it, let's see what exists, and then what do we pause and move forward, what do we move forward with. Yeah.
Is that how you do you feel like that's how you approach life in general, also beyond producing content?
Absolutely. I think the big thing that I really focus on, and in the podcast or whatever, it's just like this actually, just like an hour, back and forth video. I feel like it's really important to know like why you're doing something and how you want to do it, how you want it to feel, because the what will evolve a lot. And so as long as you're kind of pretty steady on your why and your how and your core values, the what can change a lot. And so, um, you know, let's see. I started a company when I was 28, and I really wanted this like international like exchange program for adults to come to Mexico and to learn Spanish, but through cultural events. So like they would live with a host. They would do like what kids get to do. They would live with a host family. They would get to go to markets and lucha libre and like festivals and things. It wouldn't just be. It just seems like there was a divide of fun and engagingness for young kids to learn a language versus older people that wanted to learn. Anyone at like above, mid 20s, right? And so we made this company, and I love the idea behind it, but then it took a lot more work. And it was like on the verge of being successful, but it took the amount of work it took versus the amount of enjoyment it brought was just a little bit not fully aligned. And so it's like, okay, we'll pause it for now.
Okay.
And I think it is kind of really hard to do that. But if you understand like the why and how, I really want to just create things that I want to exist in the world, and I want it to also give back to me. If I hadn't stopped Glow Local, then maybe I would have never created Meta Sessions, because there is like this kind of we always want to be the thermostat, and part of the thermostat is being a thermometer. We always want to be taking temperature of like what actually is serving us, and how do we actually live in alignment. And it might not be what we originally thought we wanted. And I think at the end of the day, we will care more about living in alignment than actually achieving the things that we think that we want.
Hmm, that's so true. I feel like a lot of times, I think a big part of that is just being kind of honest with ourselves, which I think is like the biggest struggle, at least for me personally. I think, especially because I know last time that we talked, you mentioned like I'm still a part of like a lot of systems. I'm a part of a giant ecosystem, and so
Hmm.
A lot of times I do find myself like having a hard time being honest, like with me about like, oh, is this what I really want to do? How
Mhm.
much like is this really worth the amount, like, various things, like, is this worth the amount of effort I'm putting in versus like
Mhm.
what I'm getting? And it's hard for me to like separate myself from these various a lot of various pressures.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of because we're getting so much input, right? We're getting so much input. It is easy to kind of just go like, but where am I? And that's why I think it is very important to give yourself space where you can be free.
Mhm.
And just like actually check where you're at. And yeah, just like I guess one of the things is like what did they say? A leash is a noose on both ends. It's just understanding that like every time you do something, like you're leading it, but it is also leading you, you know?
That is true. You always have such good quotes.
It's from a book, and I can't remember what book it was. I think it was like a dog training book. But sometimes people are like, "Oh, I have no problems with dogs, but I don't like dog owners or whatever." And just like the understanding of like, how do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And yeah, it's very easy to get lost in the sauce, but
Uh,
yeah.
Can you talk a bit about your the eco village, just to kind of switch gears a bit? I did see the video about the mini bioreactor, and I'm very interested in the whole eco village.
Yeah, sure. So the origin of the idea of an eco village, it actually starts with my grandma. So, and actually, I have this like little presentation, and I don't know if it makes sense for me to show just a little bit of it. Would you want to see just a little bit of it? Would that be helpful? Would that not be helpful? I think. Oh, wait, you know what? This is for to be transcribed. We will not use the presentation because, yeah. As much as I would love to like put this on my YouTube channel, except for actually, do you want to stop sharing your screen? I lost my video somehow. There we go. All right, wonderful. Um, so the eco village. It started with my grandma. As my grandma was aging, I found that when I was alone trying to take care of her, it was very isolating and very sad. She's my grandma and she's like, kind of physically and mentally falling apart. But when I was with family, it felt really incredible and empowering. Like this is what life was, and it was fun, and it was funny, and it was sad but meaningful, and it was just so much more. And it kind of got me thinking, like, hey, maybe we're supposed to still be living in tribe a little bit. Like maybe there's something to be said about like that's our origin. And my current mentor, Jerry Cook Gonzalez, when I asked him why he lives in a co-housing unit, he said that he feels like the fundamental unit isn't the individual, isn't the couple, isn't the nuclear family. It is tribe, actually. That
Okay.
we actually function better. And like, yes, these all exist, but the contextualized piece should be your tribe and how you fit as a lover, as a parent, as a friend through all of that. And so I discovered co-housing when I was in like 19. And in my early 20s, I just went to 3 different co-housing units. And I just really loved how it was just like a group of random people that would just have shared meals every now and again, that would have their own private space, but then also have shared spaces. It was kind of like almost the reminiscent days of when people go to college. Um, and then did more research. I'm like, wait, why couldn't we live that way? And then only as of a year and a half ago, when I quit my job as director of business development to kind of start my sabbatical, I did 2 different farming internships, one mini construction project here on Maui. And it was like, oh, why don't we live in community, have shared resources such as a hot tub and a jacuzzi and a shared co-working space? But why not also live off the land? Why not make the ground that we stand on more rich and more abundant for our species, but other species as well, like insects and other animals. And so it just became like this wonderful idea of legacy where, you know, it's a very small thing to try to create in the world, but what I would love to create in the world is just a nice little place, 5 to 10, 15, 20 acres of land where people can live, share space together, have their own private space, and have like 100 different fruit trees. And every once in a while get together, but still have independent lives. We live very diffused things, and so now that's the dream. And I'm looking to build it in Mexico. There's 3 locations that I'm looking at right now, and it's really wonderful just talking to people about it, and just realizing that even though for me right now it's a dream, there is a very small percentage of the population where that's just their day-to-day reality. And so I'm just making one other eco-village reality. And just kind of like I have found with meta sessions, there's tons of eco-villages. And the reason why I want to create mine is I have some ideas of what I would love to see exist that I haven't seen exist in other eco-villages.
Okay. Can you talk about like how, like, are you guys gonna be like growing your own food sort of thing, or like,
Yeah, so I love the idea of community. I love the idea of most of the food being grown in-house. I
Mhm.
also think that speaking of contextualizing, we got to contextualize our energy of what's important to us. And so I would say ideally 70% of all the food that we eat, most of the produce will be in-house. We'll know it's organic. We'll know it's non-GMO. We'll know that it's extra delicious because we made it with our own hands. There's absolutely, if you've never eaten a farm to table meal or if you've never cultivated your own food, I will say there is some cool magicness in it. Like it's like the best tasting tomato when you've actually made that tomato, or you did nothing, right? You actually put the seed in the ground, you watered it and gave it sun, and then all of a sudden, it's like it makes you believe in magic. You're like, wait, but then I get to eat this. But will we get our walnuts from Costco? Yeah, maybe. Because there are certain things that are actually really labor intensive. One of the farms that I worked at, we cultivated our own coffee. And my golly gosh, I see why coffee is so expensive. It is very, very, very labor intensive.
oh,
And so I do think that there is like a fluidity of saying, like, yes, we want to eat majority in house, so to
mm,
speak. But, if you want to go and get, a double latte frappuccino, you can go ahead and do that. And there will be people in the village that will want to do that, right? There might be someone who's like a coffee roaster that wants to do the whole process. They absolutely can have their plot and gather their own coffee trees, but fully knowing that like one cup of coffee, that's like 5 hours of work for one cup of coffee if you paired it out on every single thing, the whole process. And a lot of people just don't have that time. So I think it will be majority sustainable. We'll definitely think of rainwater catchment systems, gray water systems, solar. Um, but, you know, why not collaborate with the modern world? It would be kind of cool though to have, an anti-fragile or a resilient system so that for whatever reason it's the apocalypse, we're ready, you know? So, I mean, there's that. I mean, I'm not doing it for the apocalypse, but I do want to just make it smart. And, to make it smart is to be like, we could do all right if supply chain goes out. And, how nice just to feel that extra level of freedom and security and independence.
yeah, I really like that. I ended up like getting into like kind of a rabbit hole after watching your video. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many like, I don't know, I just like living this like very organic and just peaceful kind of life. It seemed very just like very appealing.
Yeah, yeah. Especially since we have like an options that like I just that we didn't have before. It is so incredibly easy for us to like shapeshift into different worlds. The idea of like before you're like, oh, can you imagine if you could teleport? We can kind of teleport, anywhere you are. You could go to the other side of the world in less than a day.
That is
If,
true.
assuming that you're financially able and all these other things. Um, and so, I just feel like, especially now that we have the technology to keep up with it, you could live amongst trees and plants and have a lot of diversity and still have diversity of information and access to different people as well. And so I do feel like it's a really good time for the eco village because it doesn't have to necessarily be cut off from modernity. And what a beautiful contest it is to go between city, like, between urban and countryside. And I'd love to see a little bit more of that fluidity because I think historically speaking, people were either urban or rural, and I think now we actually have a lot more fluidity. And
Mhm.
um, I love the idea of living between that.
I actually really appreciate that. I appreciate this like I think the openness to just being able to go between these worlds rather than seeing it as like a very black and white, like you have to choose one or the other, but like why not have both? Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think also
I think it's a very Chinese term too, isn't it? Oh, what is it? The golden mean, Zhong something? Do you know what I'm talking about? There's two words.
No, no, I don't.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll have to send it to you after and you can back record it. But
Okay,
it's like the
okay,
golden
sounds
mean
good.
is like it's not Zhongzhi, it's like Zhongjian, Zhongjian. I don't know. Anyways, but it's a Chinese concept. Just not be too far to the right, not too far to the left, not be too far extreme, whatever, and just try to find that golden mean, that middle. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I really like that actually, because sometimes I'm like, as much as like I don't know, I think I have a tendency to see things like that, like, oh shoot, like, I either have to live on like, just a rural area where like nobody else lives there or whatever, or just like in city. But like there is like there's a possibility for a happy medium, I think.
Absolutely. Do you want to hear my very brief description of this? I don't know if you'll quote this or not.
Okay, go for
I
it.
think it starts with monotheism.
Okay.
So I think for a long time in societies we had polytheism. If you look a lot of ancient traditions, in like Hinduism or the Nordic gods or even the Greek gods and Roman gods, indigenous tribes, there were plenty of gods and like the world and the life in which we lived in the frame was very dynamic.
Mhm.
And then I actually think it was the birth of monotheism, thank you, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, that we kind of created this kind of a mono God, right? And we also get monogamy also, like all this like idea of like this singular. And what ends up happening in that singularity is you get a duality. There is night, there is day, there is good, there is bad, there is heaven, and there is hell. And I actually think that in a lot of ways, that was the beginning of us having this like all or nothing thinking. And
Mhm.
and I just think it oversimplifies life's experiences and actually I think creates maybe a bit more tension if we got versus in the idea of like getting comfortable with living between the nuances of everything. And that's what I thought was very interesting. And like if you go to Greek mythology, there are angry gods, there are jealous gods, there's spiteful gods, and they represent kind of like every or like kind of any mythology, everything that the human dynamic has. And even the idea of a bad day. I mean, a lot of the most beautiful and meaningful character building that has happened to us is through hardship. And so I think it's good to not underplay those days of sadness or those days of lack of motivation or whatever, because there's normally like a lot of gems in that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that because actually, like, so my partner actually thinks the same way about the monotheism, kind of giving rise to a lot of these like this like binary thinking. Yeah, because he actually grew up in very much like a Christian household, and
Mm,
he has really very much stepped away from it because he realized it wasn't what he wanted and it didn't fit who he was as a person.
hmm
And so these were kind of some of the things that he identified that he did not like about it.
hmm
Um, so yeah, that is interesting. Um, I think so. I know that we're getting kind of close to your hard stop. So I think what I want to end with is the last thing that you just talked about how like a lot of the gems come from our bad days or like the hardships that we deal with. Um, can you talk about how I guess like because a lot of times when you're stuck in those hardships or those, difficult times, it's very hard to see that like there is going to be an end of the tunnel where you're going to look back and think like, oh yeah, I really grew from that. So what are some of the things that like you can tell yourself like now, maybe like when you're in the thick of it? Um,
Yeah. So there's so many ways in which we can contextualize our experience. And I feel like that's the big thing, right? And so even to say, okay, I'm experiencing this, you can actually like contextualize it almost like as if it's a die. And it's not a problem, it's a puzzle. And there's all these different elements of it. And so you might be really feeling into one element of it, and you're not trying to say, oh, it's this or it's that. I mean, you can say, yeah, it's this, that, 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 and then, kind of put it where it needs to go. And so, I mean, what can one do or what do I do? One, I just try to give it acknowledgement, like what's here, what's here right now. And it's normally emotional, right? When we're stopped, it's not like, oh my God, even any kind of intellectual problem, the part that hurts isn't the intellectual problem. It's the pain from what it means to us. And so really just saying, what's coming up for me? Like, like whose voice is it? What is it saying to me? Like, how does this endanger me or how, understanding it and then to be able to like give a space for that. You don't want to bypass it because then it'll come up like even bigger, that's what happens when you repress and whatever, then it just comes out with its wrath being like, you tried to ignore me. So you don't ignore it. You acknowledge it. You say, like, I see you, you're right here. Okay. And then I think it's really about, to contextualize it. So you can create this kind of intellectual understanding. Okay, why did they exist? What triggered it? What helps it? What other people have experienced something like this? What could this mean in the big picture? If I put my 5-year-old self and my 80-year-old self at the table with me, what would they think about this problem? You know? So I think the big thing is to not just connect it to one thing, but to try to and so when I say contextualize, it's really connect it to a lot of different things, And I think what really helps is just to, in connecting it, connect it to other people, connect it to other areas in your life. So if you're going through a stage of grief, it won't be the first. If it's your first time experiencing grief, it's not going to be the last time. You're going to feel grief before. And so, you're like, oh man, this sucks. And you're like, well, this is step one. And here's an opportunity for me to like really understand, how I am or whatever. And then when you see grief in someone else, wow, how amazing that you can like hold space for someone and see someone, in their grief, fully knowing it's not, the same as your grief, but, everyone has their own dynamic. So I just feel like when you can kind of, when you can go and understand more of its purpose, you can actually kind of contextualize yourself as like the bigger whole. And I feel like that really helps just kind of release it a little, or release the attachment to it and give it like more meaning and brevity. I also think a sense of humor really helps. Developing a dark sense of humor, like, well, other people are going to be experiencing like this, and that's good, Yeah.
Okay, I love that. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to actually go back and like transcribe the whole thing. And then I usually take some time to kind of like I'll sometimes reorder things because so I don't know, the way that my brain works is pretty like scattered. And so sometimes like I'll think of something, but like the reality is that I intend to like move it back up somewhere in the interview. So once I'm done with the cuts, I will send it to you. Um, but expect them sometime in the next couple weeks or so.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. And then if you can send me this video, maybe I'll cut it up and I'll just put it on my website as just like mini, Lotus interview with the CEO and founder of Lotus magazine, with Meta Sessions interview and just, go from there,
Okay, sounds good. I would love that. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, cool. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care. Bye.